Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in just a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other Friday to explore a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Summer is in the rear view mirror, at least for me as my kids begin to think about first day of school in a couple days. I have missed the two of you. We've aired those mini-sodes, but we haven't actually spoken like this for almost 2 months. So, what is going on? You guys survived? What's happened?
Yeah, we did. We did a big summer road trip, and it was 3 weeks long. And I have to say that now that our kids are just old enough to manage themselves better, like what it means for me is that I just eat like enchiladas for lunch and then take a 2-hour nap in the car in the front seat. So really feel like we're coming into a whole new era of family road trips. Yeah, it's nice.
I don't is there a single highlight that sticks out? Because you guys went a lot of places from what I could tell.
I mean, I think the best moment, I don't know if this is a highlight, but when we were in Carlsbad Caverns, which is an incredible place. I grew up going there. It's just astonishing to see in person, but it's quite a hike down. And we were getting our kids down there. Our 8-year-old, he's there for it. He's loving it. And our 5-year-old looks up at me and she goes, "You guys are having a great time, but I'm having a terrible time." And I was like, that is exactly, welcome to a family vacation, sweetheart. So it's a good description.
Amazing.
It was awesome.
That's amazing. RJ, how's your summer been?
It's been good. Got some good family time. We spent some time out in the hill country of Texas, which is beautiful. Spent some time on the river, did some cliff jumping and some rope swinging and some floating and some tree jumping and it was good. It was great. We had good family time.
We've had a fantastic summer. I couldn't after the sort of craziness of the touring for the book in the spring, I just feel like we really needed some family time and got to see my family and got to go to all sorts of bodies of water. And this past week, we got to go to a family camp where I got to speak about the book. In fact, on Lake Michigan, Camp Arcadia. And it was, it's this sort of thing that like, I don't think it would even cross the radar screen of something we would do otherwise. But then you go and like the kids are having a blast. It's beautiful. No one has to do any dishes. No one has to feed anyone. And there's like tons of like there's no screens anywhere. And we just all left being like, we got there, we didn't know what to expect. And we left being like, wow, that is what we needed. So,
yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm ready to go on this cast too. And because it's the beginning of the school year for some people, for kids, the beginning of sort of just the things picking up, I thought we would first start by talking about what the school year means for a lot of kids. And this is a not very subtle title by Kim Brooks in the New York Times this past week.
Let's go heavy right away. Let's do it.
Yeah, why not?
No room for optimism. Let's just go deep and dark.
Well, hey, what did we say? We're not optimistic. We're hopeful, though.
Buckle up, unoptimistic listeners.
That's right.
It's the title is "We Have Ruined Childhood," and by Kim Brooks in the New York Times, and
like the three of us.
It opens up. Just us. Thank you, Mockingcast. According to psychologist Peter Gray, children today are more depressed than they were during the Great Depression and more anxious than they were at the height of the Cold War. And he cites studies in 2019. Between 2009 and 2017, rates of depression rose by more than 60% among those ages 14 to 17 and 47% among those ages 12 to 13. And what this article really focuses on the role of school stress in mental distress. And it's backed up by data on the timing of child suicide, that the suicide rate for children is twice what it is for children during months when school is in session than when it's not in session. Whereas for adults, it's always higher in the summer. For many children, Brooks goes on to write, when the school day is over, it hardly matters. The hours outside of school are more like school than ever. Children spend afternoons, weekends, and summers in aftercare and camps while their parents work. The areas where children once congregated for unstructured, unsupervised play are now off limits. Well, just a way to make you guys feel terribly guilty going into the new year. What sprang across your mind when you read this?
Well, this is a hard piece, I think, for people to take in if they like work full time. If both parents work full time, we work full time, and then like your kid has to go into an after school program, and then in the summer, like guess what, you're still working, and they've got to go to these camps. So yeah, this was really hard to read. What is interesting about our life right now is that I am never on top of deadlines. And my kid has always gone to this program, after school program at his school that I'm going to be honest with you is a little sketchy. He came home like 3 weeks in his first year and like knew the F word, you know what I mean? And which we
I know those programs. Yeah.
It's like but he got really good at soccer because he had to play against like, fifth grade boys who were twice his size. So I was like, well, I feel like so anyway, I waited too late to sign him up. And so they're full. And so we're having to figure out after school care and we can't afford a nanny. And so this is meaning a lot of like us like trying to manage work and him and what has been very weird is that we've been relieved by that. Because it's meant that like we can't, it's meant that we can't be like, oh, well, I have to stay at work until 6 p.m. every night. And you know what I mean? Because like we actually have to leave earlier. And even if that means picking him up, bringing him to work, like I realize we're super privileged that we're in a line of work that, involves Sundays, involves night meetings. And so we can kind of finesse it more, but it's been weird how relieved we are. The other thing I have to say, and this is really horrible to admit, our son broke his arm in like a very glorious, catastrophic way a few weeks ago, which means that he can't do any of the after school activities he's always done that we're like, he has to do. So like we're out of sports for the fall. We're out of violin lessons. Thank you, Jesus, for the fall. And we're kind of relieved by that too, which is, feels dark, right? He broke his arm, but it's weird how much of this like push for work and push for keeping them. Because the article even talks about it's like, even if you pick them up, you're kind of carting them from one activity to the next, right? We're out of that game this fall, and it's kind of thrilling for us. Like it feels like our vacation's been extended. Wow. So yeah, I don't know.
I think about my oldest son, who think junior year is over, thank God. And he goes to a great school and he has great friends and I think has by and large had a good time there. And yet, even he would say, I think he has some ambivalence because he worked so hard. He literally was up past 2 a.m. just about every night last year and worked so hard and, got the GPA he wanted, got the test scores he wanted. He actually took a few SAT subject tests in June, and although his scores were great, they weren't as good as he wanted. And so he's like, Mom, I'm taking them again in August. I'm doing it. My son, my second son, I think based on the experience my first son had, sort of made a different choice about where he wanted to go to school and the kind of experience he wanted to have. He wanted things to be a little bit more laid back and to have some more balance in his life. But I do wonder, you always how much of this stuff is external and how much is internal? Sarah, like you were talking about, how much it is living in a culture where it seems like either you're totally going to make it, quote unquote, or you're really going to struggle, and there is no in between. Right. There's been so much written about like the disappearance of the middle class, and like either you're going to be super wealthy and super successful, or you're just going to like scrape by, and there's no middle ground, and not having this feeling like it's going to be okay. You are going to be okay. Your kids are going to be okay, because like you said, Sarah, like you said, there you and Josh are like both working full-time jobs, working really hard, like doing amazing work, and you can't afford a nanny.
Right. I mean, like, yeah.
And you probably don't feel flush. And so how much is the culture we live in and all these lies that we buy into that are constantly fed to us about what we need to be to earn our place in the universe? And then how much is internal? How much is just like, my oldest son would be like that no matter what. He's just driven. He just needs to do his absolute best on everything. And it doesn't matter where he would have gone to school. He would have been the same way. So I wrestle with that. How much of this do we do to ourselves? And your story, Sarah, because I totally relate to that. Like, it is a relief sometimes when things don't go according to plan and you have an excuse.
Oh,
you have
right?
an excuse. Yes. Oh my gosh. Harvey
the whole
was
year
like,
I was like, no after school activities. Like, sorry, Harvey happened.
Well,
and I was like, this is a glorious year.
Even those few,
I talk about that in Seculosity. They say that like the only way as Americans can really take a break is through catastrophic weather.
A natural disaster.
The only time we actually feel okay,
Lord
like
God.
let off the hook, because there's such a guilt factor.
I do think the bigger question this article poses is, so how do we help our kids? I mean, I think that's really, because, you start talking about suicide in children, and it's terrifying.
Yeah.
But I happen to have a kid, kids are snugglers generally, but you always have that one kid that's like more into it. And, our daughter is like that, and she just makes me stop all the time. And I've gotten better about letting myself do it just to sit with her. And I said to her the other day, because she's just so sweet. And I said to her the other day, I was like, what are we going to do? Because she's also super tall. What are we going to do when you're too big to sit in my lap? And she just leaned over and whispered in her, she's like, we're just going to have to hug all the time.
Aww.
And I was like, you have this expectation and this plan that like I need to stop regularly just to like hold you and be with you and have our family together. And, I think people feel this pressure that looks like this kind of prescribed like game night or whatever, this stuff that like we set the standard so high as parents of what that has to look like that then we don't want to do it. And I just like, I want to speak over people that like the past couple of weeks have been awesome, because we've had a kid with a broken arm. It's 100 degrees in Houston. He can't go outside for very long because he can't sweat. We've watched a ton of movies as a family, like laid on the couch together, eating candy, I think when we read these pieces, for me, at least personally, I get so overwhelmed that I forget that like I'm already doing some of this stuff and that I don't have to make it so hard and so prescribed and like the cover of, Parents Magazine, that it becomes out of reach. That what your kids actually really need is just you. They don't need some like better version of you. They just need you. So anyway.
That actually leads kind of directly into the next piece that we're talking about, because we're talking about a better version of you, Sarah, and particularly of a better version of women. We got two sort of competing, or it's almost like a question and answer type thing going on with these next two pieces. It was published in The Guardian, called Athleisure, Bar and Kale, The Tyranny of the Ideal Woman, by Gia Tolentino, who's a New Yorker writer and kind of a really like a rising star, big time star in the kind of essay world right now. And this is published in The Guardian, Athleisure. She writes, the ideal woman today is always optimizing. The ideal woman can be whatever she wants to be, as long as she manages to act upon the belief that perfecting herself and streamlining her relationship to the world can be a matter of both work and pleasure, or in other words, of lifestyle. The psychological parasite of the ideal woman has evolved to survive in an ecosystem that pretends to resist her. If women start to resist an aesthetic, like the over-application of Photoshop, the aesthetic just changes to suit us. The power of the ideal image never actually wanes. In these pursuits, most pleasures end up being traps, and every public-facing demand escalates in perpetuity. Satisfaction remains, under the terms of the system, necessarily out of reach. I think about this every time I do something that feels particularly efficient and self-interested, like eating lunch at a fast casual chopped salad chain like Sweet Green, which feels less like a place to eat and more like a refueling station. The chopped salad is engineered to, quote, free one's hand and eyes from the task of consuming nutrients so that precious attention can be directed toward a small screen where it is more urgently needed so that it can consume data, work email, or Amazon's nearly infinite catalog, or Facebook's actually infinite news feed. Of course, an entire industry has sprung up to give optimization a uniform. Athleisure. or athletic leisure. The type of clothing you wear when you are either acting on or signaling your desire to have an optimized life. I define athleisure as exercise gear that you pay too much money for. But defined more broadly, athleisure was a $97 billion category by 2016. Athleisure is reliably comfortable and supportive in a world that is not. I love that. This is how athleisure has carved out the space between exercise apparel and fashion. The former category optimizes your performance. The latter optimizes your appearance. And athleisure does both simultaneously. In recent years, pop culture has started to reflect the fractures in selfhood that social media creates. Where beauty is concerned, we have deployed technology not only to meet the demands of the system, but to actually expand these demands.
So I was actually the whole athleisure thing. I was thinking about the first time someone accused me of dressing that way. And I was 20, and people were starting to wear yoga pants at Ole Miss. And I was had a boyfriend in New Orleans, and we were around one of his friends, and he kind of sneeringly looked at me and said, "You're dressed like one of those moms in Uptown." And I was like, what? Like, I had no idea what he meant, but it was like the first time. So that was almost 20 years ago. I'm 30, almost 37. So like the progression of this is pretty fascinating to me. And now that I'm like, I literally am wearing like a sports bra, a sports shirt, and running shorts. Right? Like, and have I exercised today? No, I have not. You know what I mean? Like, but I'm wearing this. Because it is really comfortable.
Yeah, you want to be like, it seems like it's so hard to be a woman. Can we really begrudge them for like having like this?
I know. Like,
come on, anything.
Well, it's one only two acceptable outfits. You're either like dressed for success, or you're an athleisure. Like, that's all you can do.
RJ.
And there is no in between.
It's so true. Like, you're either in this, like where I live, you're either in this, or you're in like, they're Mexican and Guatemalan, but they'll like, do you know what I mean? Like they're the embroidered flower dresses that like white women wear in Houston. And it's really short, right? You wear it really short with like really high, like, sandals, like platform sandals, giant colored earrings, you know? And like, you're either in that look, or you know what I mean? You're either like a white girl in Coco, right? Or like you're about to run a 5K. Like, those are the two genres. The thing that really haunted me about this piece is how I do find myself in those spaces. And I know I'm not alone. Like, I'm not the only thinking, feeling woman in the room. In these spaces where we've all agreed that this is what we're going to do. I mean, this is a lot like the last piece we talked about, even though like it's really kind of creepy that we're all doing it, you know? Like, I've been to a bar class before. She writes a lot about bar, and it is like, and I've been to spin classes before, and they do kind of encourage this like sort of religious, sort of sexual experience that's like very unnerving. And we've all agreed to be there to do it because we're all going to like be in the best shape of our lives, right? Or
optimize.
We've all agreed we're going to go to Salada. I mean, we have a bar studio in our neighborhood, and it's got like a place downstairs from it that you can eat like very like, here's how many calories is in this, like in a very optimized way. You can also get alcohol there. So I know a frequent thing is you go to bar class and then you have too much to drink. So it's,
Work hard, play hard.
It's right, exactly. It's all really creepy, but that pressure to live forever is there. I mean, I know I talk about this all the time, but that really is, I feel like that's the gift as an ordained woman in my area that I can bring to the table. I genuinely believe like that's the sacramental gift that like I've been given in this neighborhood, in this area, because I love where we live. I love the people we live around, but like this description of womanhood is very, very prominent in the area I live in. And I really feel like the best thing I can say sometimes is just like, we're all going to be dead. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I know I say that all the time on here. I feel like I told this story, but I was at something recently. It was at the beginning of the summer, and I was standing there with a group of women from our neighborhood, and one of them came over, and we're talking about where are we going to go? What are we going to do? And this woman is like super tiny, super fit, right? And she's like, well, there's no way I'm getting in the pool this summer, not with this body. And I'm like, what? And I said, seriously? And she's like, oh yeah, like I can't even let my kids see this. And I just said, you're going to be dead in a few decades. Like, get in the pool. I mean, that's like, that's.
Has she spoken to you since?
I say
How did that go?
And, not well, but like, I can't. The Holy Ghost compels me to tell you that, like,
okay.
You can't.
The Holy Ghost.
Like, you can't, like, you're gonna die. You know what I mean? Like, all this stuff is this, like, weird. If we just keep ourselves busy enough, we don't have to face, I mean, not just death, but right, like an unhappy marriage or any of these things. I mean, I'm always fascinated when I see these women who sort of check all these boxes physically and then have this like guy next to them who like just does whatever the hell he wants. You know what I mean?
I was about to
Like,
say, I think I know where you're going with this.
Much, doesn't exercise,
bod.
is not dressed up at all. Like, she's in heels, he's in a ratty t-shirt. Like, I'm just like, man, this is a lot of work and he's not doing anything. I mean, Dave, I do think your point is a good one because I think this is, I don't think men have the pressure women have, but I think it's moving in that direction. Like,
Well,
I think
optimization stuff is certainly there.
I mean,
Like,
you got to be equally yoked, right?
And when they when they describe that, I'd never thought about chopped salad places being popular in part because you don't have to look at what you can just spear, you can just shovel stuff into your mouth, and you don't have to even cut anything, and it increases. You can look at a screen while you're eating, and that's we talk about the cult of productivity quite a bit and optimization nation, and this is it's a view of human beings as machines, and we embrace it because we want to be distracted, I think, from what you told that lady at the pool, and we want to also feel like we're getting ahead and climbing whatever ladder it is of performance we're on. But she has such a great way of putting it, and the way that technology, certainly when it comes to beauty, but there are many other ways in which we use technology to meet the demands of some little L law, and it just ends up, expanding those demands. And how, that's the way that we talk about housework. Once the vacuum cleaner came, it was no longer acceptable for your living room to be anything but spotless. So it's like it actually increased that sort of thing. So I don't know, RJ, where are you at with the tyranny of the ideal woman?
Well,
I could have made a joke there. I could have made a joke.
You could have.
I'm just like, RJ eats really efficiently. Like, sometimes he gets fast food. You know what I mean? So
I do. Like I said, Burger King twice a month. Gotta have it Thursdays, man. It's so conveniently next to the hospital. Athleisure, just that word. I mean, the whole thing made me think about 1984, honestly. And that book has been in the public consciousness a little bit. And I actually read it last summer because my son had to read it for school. And he's like, Dad, this book is so good. And the whole notion of doublespeak, like, it's insane. Athleisure. It's an insane concept. It's an insane word. It's an oxymoron. It's like, what are you talking about? And yet at the same time, this sense that what Orwell got wrong is that I think what he didn't realize is we don't need someone else to do this to us. We do it to ourselves. The fad that we kind of missed this summer. Remember the whole, which is gone now, the selfies you took that would age you? What was that called?
Oh, yeah.
The app, right? And then it turned out, guess what? Maybe that was a facial recognition hack that was perpetrated by Russian intelligence services. And it's like, people don't need to force us into kind of abusing ourselves. We will do it willingly, right? We will enslave ourselves. We will athleisure ourselves to death. And it's like almost the more freedom you give us, the more we're going to harm ourselves. How much rope do you want to give us? Because we will hang ourselves. And then I also thought the beginning of the article, as she was listing off all the attributes of the, what's it called? The perfect woman, the idealized, the optimized. I couldn't help but think of Proverbs 31, right? Which Proverbs 31, as kind of rough as it is and as much of an idealized vision as it presents of what the ideal Christian or Jewish woman looks like, it is nothing compared to what she lays out. I mean, what she lays out, into my mind, makes Proverbs 31 look almost like small potatoes. Like maybe you don't feel that way, Sarah, but it's what you've talked about, Dave, it's like the law is everywhere. And when you take away the religious law, which at least has like a little bit of grace and mercy and humanity built into it, you're just going to replace it with something way, way worse. And guess what? You're also going to take out any possibility of grace, mercy, forgiveness, sin, failure. So it was hard to read. And I just feel I don't want to live in a world like that. And it's painful.
I have to say, bar classes are really intense and crazy for all the reasons she listed, but also
I've got enough crazy in my life.
Everyone shows up and so maybe there's a third category. It's white women in cocoa. It's you're going to run a 5K, or it's you're now a professional ballerina, because these ladies show up and you're like head to toe black. And this is always a problem for me. You've got to have long enough hair to put in a bun. You know what I mean? It's a look. And then you get in there and you work. I mean, it's my husband told me there was a piece recently, that they're seeing younger and younger hip replacements, surgery, because you're having to turn out. I mean, it's ballet, right? But only you're 27 and never did ballet. Anyway, it's I mean, it is abusing yourself.
Squeeze. It reminds me of other thing we missed this summer is there's a couple of sort of high profile evangelicals who renounced their faith. They're deconverted, and
whoever do you mean, David?
Well, we're talking about Josh Harrison, and then recently there was this there was some guy, a worship leader from Hillsong, I guess, who did something on Instagram, and he's like, I just don't know about my faith anymore. No one seems to be talking about the contradictions in the Bible. And you're like, wait, what? Everyone, who are you hanging out with? But at the end, he's like, so I don't really know what's true.
Sorry.
But he's like, but I just know, I don't know where it fits in with God, but just love everybody, absolutely, be kind, absolutely. And you're like, whoa. So he triples down on the law at the end of the thing in with absolutes. And you're like,
because that's all you have.
You're leaving behind the mercy and the person of Jesus, or at least you're flirting with it. I don't know what's good in the guy's heart, but I just thought it was unbelievable how even it's what sounds like good news. You're like, oh, I'm going to be free of these oppressive demands. Just, whatever. Love everybody at all times, unconditionally and absolutely. You're like, what? No, thank you. That sounds like the tyranny of the ideal person, not the ideal man.
Don't be fat. You know what I mean? You might as well be saying the same thing.
Don't be fat. Don't waste. Be authentic. All these.
That sounds like someone who's been personally wounded by someone in the church.
I mean, that's what I wrote something about Harris on the site and tried to just be as compassionate as possible, because I think that most of these decisions are emotional before they're intellectual. And that's not to dismiss everything, but I think that's, what the heart desires, the will chooses, and the mind justifies. We said it once. We'll say it again. And speaking of people choosing things, as a response, or at least partly a response to this tyranny that Gia describes so trenchantly, was an article that appeared last week in the Huffington Post, a long one by Eve Fairbanks, who we've quoted before. It's called "Behold the Millennial Nuns," and that's Nuns.
Y'all heard, not None. We're talking about a new kind of nun. Y'all never heard of these before.
Sarah has an announcement to make.
A little hopeful. More and more women are being called to the religious life after 50 straight years of decline. And these aspiring nuns are not like the old ones. They're more diverse. 90% of American nuns in 2009 identified as white. Last year, fewer than 60% of new entrants to convents did. They're also younger. The average age for taking the final step into the religious life a decade ago was 40. Today, it's 24. Get this. They're disproportionately middle children, often high-flying and high-achieving. Typical discernment stories on blogs or in Catholic press start with lines like, quote, she played lacrosse and went to Rutgers, or she was a Harvard graduate with a wonderful boyfriend. These young women that come to find out have one last surprise after being, high-achieving and kind of performancist, I guess. They tend to be far more doctrinally conservative than their predecessors. If you go deeper into their social media feeds, past the wacky photos of habited nuns making the hang loose sign, you'll find a firm devotion to the most traditional of Catholic beliefs. And then she profiles a bunch of people here. One is Rachel struggled to reconcile the person she hoped she would be with the person she was actually becoming. When she was very little, she was an academic wunderkind. Her first grade teacher had her administer spelling tests to her peers because, quote, I got hundreds on everything. But this achievement began to feel more like a burden. Every perfect score she got was a challenge to get another perfect score on the next exam. Whoa. Her sophomore year of college, Rachel drove 8 hours straight from her campus to a discernment retreat in Ann Arbor, Michigan for hundreds of young women. And one of the sisters gave the young women a lecture. A woman of faith, she said, was already majestic. She had nothing to prove. You are beautiful, the sister told them. God loved them already. And the ways that they were broken were the ways God intended them to seem broken for his purposes. It was a joy to feel like not everything was up to her, that she wasn't entirely responsible for answering questions like, does my existence have meaning, and who's going to love me? One night, experiencing anxiety while lying in bed, she rolled over and scribbled in her journal, you are unconditionally loved, then fell into a sleep as deep as she could remember. And then Fairbanks closes by saying, we are a thing that is wounded, American society. People raised for the new millennium were to be a kind of final proof that democracy in American society was indeed the greatest that ever could be made. Now that primitive superstitions had been cleared, tech and science and finance reigned, major political threats had fallen, and our hegemony seemed complete. We were, and shakily remained, utopian in ways that I would laugh at if I hadn't bought into them too. More than half of millennials still tell pollsters they believe they're going to be millionaires. Most of us expected to achieve idyllic marriages, even though so many of our parents had divorced. We were taught that anything you hoped for could be achieved with the right planning, that life is a series of hacks, fabulous tricks, but ones that have a reliable code for how to repeat them. Of course, none of this was true. When I read a passage from one of these books on vocation to an Oregon-based psychotherapist who focuses on counseling young adults, she laughs. She says, that's the essence of what I hear over and over again, that we're raised in a quantitative culture with quantitative goals. So fascinating phenomenon. I know it's a lot to take in, but more and more women, young women going into becoming nuns. I loved this article. I thought it was pretty thorough and fascinating.
I'm so excited right now. I have never written this piece for us, but I would not be an ordained woman if it weren't for the Sister Act franchise. Because
I've never heard you say that.
I'd never seen ordained women before, and that was the closest thing I had ever seen was Whoopi Goldberg, you know? And there was also this beautiful, for me, thing of like, if they're going to let Whoopi Goldberg and especially her character in that movie, become a nun, then maybe they would let me into religious life. Like there was like, maybe there's room for me in that too.
Wow.
I mean, I joke about how I always used to write nun and housewife when I had to ask, when they'd ask me what I wanted to be when I grew up. But I mean, I really felt, the idea of being a nun was always very compelling to me as a kid. So I love that there are these young women that are choosing this. It's fascinating to me how they have this more fervent sense of belief, right? And I love that because I definitely see that in my own tradition where younger people are coming out and we just are sort of clinging to the, I don't want to say orthodox theology because that really upsets people because it denotes creedal
faith,
theology.
biblical.
Yeah. So we're sort of clinging to that. And it is very interesting.
The bodily resurrection, for example.
Maybe as a random example, and I actually, there's something really beautiful about that to me because I think as an ordained woman, and I know it's different because I'm not a nun, but as an ordained woman, I think a lot of the women who sort of made headway for us to be ordained, I don't know what the end game was for them, but they did not anticipate us at this generation being more orthodox. I mean, that's a general statement, but a lot of the women I think thought, well, if we can get these young women ordained, things will get more and more liberal. And I don't, liberal is such a loaded word, but we would cling less and less to things like the creed.
Heretical? Is heretical a better word?
It's been a hot word lately on certain Twitter accounts, but I think it's so beautiful. I was talking to a friend about this phenomenon, and so I'm loving seeing this here. That actually I'm so thankful for all the women that worked for me to get ordained. And this is so incredible. But like maybe perhaps the most beautiful accomplishment in that is that I'm actually allowed to just believe what I want to believe, right? That I didn't have to kind of pick their stream and get more and more radicalized in it, like that I can actually be myself and believe what I believe. That's too much rambling for me about this, but anyway, I love this. I think it's incredible that these young women are turning in this direction.
Well, what you said really mirrors what happened with the presidential campaign a couple of years ago, where some of the old guard feminists were frustrated with younger women who were supporting Bernie Sanders and really just felt like they should be for Hillary no matter what. So it's interesting to see that happening in kind of religious life to some degree as well.
Yeah. No, I was thinking, that, and I've written about it first before, but the thing I always think about is being at a thing for women who are, it was to celebrate the anniversary of women being ordained in the priesthood. And I was the youngest woman there. And it was all these women who were old enough to be my mom and really sweet, lovely women. But they looked at me and said, why have you not fought harder for inclusive language about God? In other words, why have you not fought harder for us to refer to God in the feminine? And I turned and said, why have you not fought harder for us to have better childcare at clergy events? And it's like, we weren't exactly speaking the same language. You're going to be dead soon. No, I don't say that to everyone. But but it's, I think there's this beautiful thing that like it is established enough that we can turn back to the original in some way, right? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I had mixed emotions about this article. I'm glad you were encouraged by it, Sarah. I guess there was a push and pull, right? That there was definitely some sense of younger women, and I do not blame them in light of the Guardian article we just talked about, wanting to just escape the insanity of our culture and the insanity of the messages that they are being presented with about what it means to be a woman in the world, what it means to be a person in the world, what success looks like. Like, I completely understand the impulse to just like run away from all of that into wearing a habit and being cloistered and being a nun and engaging in a whole new type of existence. And then it did talk a little bit eventually about not just running away from something, but actually running towards something, running away from the world, but also running towards Jesus, running towards unconditional love, running towards this sense that I am beloved by God and valued by God, even if I never accomplish anything, even if I never do anything, regardless of how I look or what I do in my life. And that was comforting, because I do think if you're just running away from something, like, life is hard no matter what. And whether you kind of go into married life and have children and engage in all that, or whether you choose celibacy and become a nun and it's a cloistered, a habit-wearing existence, it's going to be tough no matter what. And you have to have some sense of what you are doing what you're running towards, and not just what you're running away from. Like I was preaching recently and talking about a missionary who once said to me, who'd been overseas for like decades, and he said, if you go into missionary work because you love people, you're not going to last very long, because people are pretty impossible. Like, you have to go into it because you love Jesus, and because even more that you are loved by Jesus in the midst of your own disastrousness, and then maybe you can pass that through to the sinners that you find yourself ministering to. So I find it's just fascinating. And the fact that they talked about this, the Catholic Church, in spite of all the scandals they've gone through, it's very interesting. I mean, I did know a bunch of people when I lived in New York that were young and very hardcore Catholic people, and very much into very conservative Catholic theology, probably much more Ratzinger fans than Francis fans.
Wow.
So it's interesting to see. I mean, there was a line of the article about young people coming to the realization that, quote unquote, I'm a lot more conservative than I thought I was, which means a whole lot of different things. But at least coming to an awareness that they don't have as much control over their lives as they thought they did, and maybe the things they thought would make them happy aren't going to actually, when they're searching for something more time-tested, more lasting. But it does make me nervous. I'm worried about people waking up 15 or 20 years from now and being like, why am I here? But isn't that true for everybody? No
Yeah.
matter what, doesn't everyone have a midlife crisis no matter what kind of life they quote unquote choose?
And I would say, like, we spent a lot of time in New York at a monastery that had younger men coming through. And I would say that those communities are much better about saying maybe you don't belong here and maybe you need her a lot. I mean, they don't just, it's not like it was,
Right.
the Middle Ages, which is
people,
kind of incredible. The other thing that's interesting to me, though, when I think about kind of just women's spirituality is, some of the mystics, some of the women writers, who were writing in the Middle Ages, and it really is kind of I mean, I love that you pointed this out. It is kind of anti this like kale consuming, bar class attending person. I mean, it really, the way that they write, and I'm assuming some of these young nuns are reading, Mechthild of Magdeburg. I'm assuming this is like some of their stuff that they'd be into, and it may or may not be, but it really kind of says, just like, here I am, Lord, like, and all that I am, and you love me no matter what. And there's something really freeing about that. And for me, I get a little nervous when we say, and I'm not saying you were saying this, but when we say that people who are in that religious world are running from something, or that they're not in reality, because I actually think sometimes they're in a much harsher reality. We can really romanticize them living in those communities. Those communities are hard to live in,
Yeah, absolutely.
You're like in it together no matter what. It's like being married to a lot of people on some level. So anyway, it's just, I am encouraged by this. And we all know, like, I'm not like the world's best Catholic, but that's a joke.
Do you guys remember a few weeks ago we highlighted something? I think it was a dean at the USC who is like a dean of religious life or spiritual life, and was talking about loneliness and just really real sadness of undergraduates, and as they've gotten more and more unyoked from institutions that would sort of and more even indoctrinated, it's sort of a kind of autonomy thing. They're less asking like, how should I live, and more asking, why should I live? And then he talks about what they're sort of trying to do to help that. And he says, I remember in the fall, we will debut our new artificial intelligence well-being assistant named Ari, which will guide students to appropriate support resources. We also offer host yoga classes, drum circles, friendship courses, community teas, coloring sessions, laughing groups, sleep classes, connection workshops, meditation retreats, campfire conversations, and primal scream opportunities. We've recently appointed our first director of belonging and our full-time wellness dog, Professor Beauregard Tirebiter. Strolls the campus daily.
Okay.
And when I
this is a joke, right? This
is
is not real. This is not real.
No, this is totally real. This was in the Boston
It's 100%
Globe.
real.
And
Jesus,
I remember
Mary, and
thinking, or maybe
Joseph.
the LA Times, and I wrote about it, and I was like, well, it's kind of an anything but God list. It's like how far it is. You're like, none of these things on their own are terrible, but like it. Primal laughing groups, primal scream.
Well, I'd show up to Primal Scream. I'll be real.
You
I
would
would be
say anything we
there
can
for
go
that.
to, but God, and these women at least are finding some solace there. And you know who else found solace this week? Was Anderson Cooper.
Oh my gosh.
And Stephen Colbert. This is the last thing we'll talk about. There was this, Anderson Cooper, who's Vanderbilt, who just lost his mother, who was this amazing matriarch, grande dame of sort of American society. And he's, of course, the CNN anchor, and he has this sit-down conversation with Stephen Colbert, the comedian and television host. And they actually go back to something, I think the biggest post that's ever been on Mockingbird was something, it was just like an interview segment of Colbert talking about how he'd come to love the thing that he most wished hadn't happened, which was that his father and two of his brothers died in a plane crash when he was a kid. It might have been 3. And so he was left alone with his mother to sort of survive that. And he talks about how he's come to terms with that. Now, Cooper brings this up because he's clearly in grief, and he starts crying. He says, he says to Colbert, he says, "You told an interview that you have learned to, in your words, love the thing that I most wish had not happened." Then Anderson starts crying. He says, "You went on to say, what punishments of God are not gifts? Do you really believe that?" And then Colbert, there's a pause, and he looks him in the eye, and he's being completely serious. He says, "Yes." And he was quoting Tolkien. He says, it's a gift to exist, and with existence comes suffering. There's no escaping that. I don't want it to have happened. I want it to not have happened. But if you are grateful for your life, which I think is a positive thing to do, not everybody is, and I am not always myself, but it's the most positive thing to do, then you have to be grateful for all of it. You can't pick and choose what you're grateful for. And he talks about the gift that was given to him through this terrible thing that happened to him. He says, you get the awareness of other people's loss, which allows you to connect with that other person, which allows you to love more deeply and to understand what it's like to be a human being. If it's true that all humans suffer. You know, at a young age, I suffered something so that by the time I was in a serious relationships in my life with friends or with my wife or with my children, I'm understanding that everyone is suffering, which allows you to love them in a deep way, and it actually makes you grateful for your suffering, which allows you to be fully human. And then Anderson Cooper chimes in and says, you know, one of the things my mom would always say was that she said, I never asked why me when something bad had happened. I always asked why not me. And this is the great question. He says, suffering is part of being alive. Sadness, suffering, you can't actually have happiness without it. And then Colbert responds, you know, in my tradition, that's the great gift of the sacrifice of Christ, that God does it too. God suffers too. You are actually not alone. It's a moment of piercing reality in the middle of, you know, the gloom of, you know, these sort of news media today. I was undone. Sarah, you sent it to me. RJ, I no doubt you've seen this. What do you guys think?
I mean, I just thank God for Stephen Colbert. I mean, he had a very similar conversation with Joe Biden. Because I remember writing about that because they both had such, you know, Joe Biden had such extreme loss. I think he lost a daughter and a wife in a car accident in the 70s. He's such a gift. I mean, to us, because he is able to say these things, and he has an incredible platform, and people are able to hear it. And, you know, whether or not that makes people wonder about Christianity or Catholicism is frankly irrelevant to me. What matters is that he's saying it and people are able to hear it, and that's incredibly powerful. Because to say in our culture right now that suffering is a part of life, and people think you're nuts when you say stuff like that. People think, trust me, people think you're nuts if you tell them they're going to die in a few decades. It's also like, I think about, and my husband and I talk about this a lot, like the people we surround ourselves with, like we don't actually do that well with people as friends who will say, and of course we're in this complicated dynamic where we're both priests. We just have too many priests in our lives, and we're all in the same profession, and there's always like low levels or high levels of competition. And that can really be a relationship barrier, which is sad because you actually really need people who are doing the same kind of work to talk to. And we say, you know, that often we encounter people who are also clergy who might give you like, well, things are kind of hard, but then they'll just be like, but everything's awesome. And I always wonder about those people. Like, I wonder if they've had real suffering in their life. Not that I would wish that upon them, but I wonder if they have, or if they've had it and they've just denied it. I don't know, because I think real suffering doesn't let you say that everything's awesome in this, like it doesn't let you like lie about the reality of who you are. And you know what's so powerful about this, and the reason it's so compelling to see, is that usually when these conversations happen, especially between men, but between women too, they're not going to have that moment where they both say, I've been through something hard, right? They're not going to share in that way. And that's why it's just so powerful to see this on camera.
You know, when I saw that video, it reminded me that there's a billboard that's gone up in Houston. I've never lived in a city before with so many religious billboards, or really any religious billboards, but this is just, I see it every day on my way to work. It's a big black billboard with the white words, sickness is never God's will. Sickness is never God's will. And there's a little link to a website, and I went and checked it out, and it's like a, you know, local church plant or something like that. And I was like, okay, that is such a contradiction to what Stephen Colbert and what's his name again? The guy interviewing him,
Anderson Cooper.
Anderson Cooper, what they were talking about, you know, what punishments of God are not gifts versus sickness is never God's will. And why is it that sickness is never God's will sort of intellectually sounds so right and yet leaves you cold. And on the other hand, what punishments of God are not gifts intellectually sounds so awful, and yet Anderson Cooper couldn't even get the words out without weeping. What is it why did he cry when he said that? And I've been thinking about that. And I think it comes down to, one of the things we talked about in the Minnesota, it comes down to hope. That Anderson Cooper is struggling still with the death of his mother and with whatever other personal sufferings he has endured. And the question is always, do these mean that I've been abandoned? Mm-hmm. Or that there is no God, or that there is no hope, or is this pain I'm experiencing, is that all there is? Is existence just painful suffering, emptiness, and bleakness? But to choke out those words, what sufferings or what punishments of God are not gifts, that if you dare to believe that, it means that there is a God, and he is with you and loves you and is blessing you and is present. And as hard as it is to talk about God being active and present in the midst of suffering, and maybe sometimes even willing it, that is so much more hopeful. It reminds me of a story that Andrew Pearson told me once about a mother whose son died in a car accident. And she rushed to the hospital, and there he was with her dead son. And a priest walked in, and the first thing he said is, ma'am, I just want to assure you that God had nothing to do with this.
Oh, gosh.
And she turned to the priest and said, please don't take away the only hope that I have. And it's like, what else is there? Like when suffering, when illness happens, when death happens, when suffering happens, you have two choices. One is that there, either God, there is no God, or he's absent, or he doesn't care, or he's abandoned you, or he's powerless, or he's present and active and loves you and is doing something. And there is hope at the end of the day, even in the midst of suffering. So just wrestling with that, because especially when you're in position, the people don't want to talk about this, like you said, Sarah. People don't want to talk about suffering. They don't want to talk about sin. They don't want to talk about pain. They want to be positive, and they want to be uplifted, often in kind of a superficial kind of way. And can we risk talking about these real things for the sake of those that are actually suffering, and in the name of a greater hope, even though initially it's repulsive, right? Mm-hmm. Initially it's repulsive.
Oh,
it's
completely.
Like, what do you mean? What do you mean God is working in suffering? What do you mean I can't escape suffering? Like, don't tell me that. But do we have the courage to sort of break through that and talk about this enough to reach that place of actual hope and faith, and not just kind of superficial optimism and glossing over?
Yeah, and this may be like a really trite way of talking about this, but I keep thinking about the piece about this optimized, idealized woman, and how God, I really believe this. God has just given some of us, I don't know why I'm getting teary. God has just given some of us faces and bodies and height and hair and metabolisms and small boobs and, that aren't ever going to fit those categories. And sometimes when I feel the weight of not looking like other moms, we had Meet the Teacher this past week, and you wear high heels to that where we live. I tell myself I just can't, because believe me, you guys, if I had thick, long blonde hair, I'd be wearing it. You know what I mean? If I had, all the other attributes you need, if I were not the size of a brontosaurus and I had eyes that could take contact lenses, I'd be doing that. But I don't have that. I have what God has given me, and he has given me that for a very specific reason. And it is that it makes me more empathetic. I've had to be funnier. You know what I mean? I've had to find my way in this world because I can't meet those standards. And part of me, genuinely on my best days, is thank God I can't meet those standards. Because when you meet those standards, you never actually meet those standards, right? It's just all the more pressure. So I mean, I take great comfort not just in the eternal, and maybe not in these things that we, when we say suffering, we think, well, I haven't lost somebody in an airplane. Like, you wake up in the morning and like you've got to deal with, your appearance as a woman. Like, there's suffering in
Everyone
that.
suffers.
But there's also like the great love and redemption and purpose of God in that too. So anyway.
Wow. Well, I don't think there's any reason just to keep going here, because this is thank you both. I'm so happy to have this input in my own life and this conversation, and I've missed you. And I'm glad to be back. And we'll be back in, I think, a little less than 2 weeks this time. And I know it's been a little slightly longer episode, but thank you. And what was the thing you said, Sarah? Just you're gonna die. Get in the pool. Maybe that's our new slogan on the Mockingcast. You're gonna die in a couple decades. Get in the pool.
Get in the pool.
Okay, or Sarah will come and push you in. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye, friends.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by the Narrativo Group, and if you like what you've heard, please do drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. Until next time.